Sir.
Walaikum assalam. So yesterday we were near testing for proteins. Now, if you remember, a quick glance of one method of testing for what you call proteins is you basically take a test tube, fill it up up to three-fourth with the urine, and you boil the upper portion. Okay, as seen in the figure. Right, if you can see this image, you'll be able to see that only the top part is heated. Basically, what will happen is once you heat the protein, proteins will get denatured when they are heated. Right, if you heat a protein, it will get denatured. That is how you are getting turbidity. Now, generally, what happens is if the turbidity is due to phosphates, what will happen? Initially, there will be turbidity, which will in turn become precipitation, and it will get clear. That is one indication that it is because of phosphates, not proteins. Okay, so in the same test which we are taking, heat and acetic acid test, in that same test you'll be able to understand whether the turbidity is due to proteins or it is due to phosphates or it is due to carbonates. All right, how you distinguish that is, once you add urine in the test tube, you add a little bit of glacial acetic acid, 1 to 3 drops. And just for a reference, if you remember, normally the amount of protein that should be excreted in urine should be around 150 milligrams in 24 hours in the whole day, or 10 mg in 100 ml. So if someone is voiding 100 ml of urine, that should normally have 10 mg, not more than 10 mg. Right, so we are trying to look for how much amount of protein will be there. That value will be important when you are interpreting the data. So when we put the vertical when we add urine in the test tube and add a little bit of glacial acetic acid and eventually heat it, what will happen is turbidity will appear. But now let's suppose that turbidity is due to phosphates. What will happen is immediately that turbidity will precipitate and the solution will become clear. That is one thing. If it is due to carbonates, what will happen is sodium bicarbonate or any other type of carbonate, instead of precipitation, what will happen is effervescence will come. Effervescence is that cuff like what you call basically what happens when you add water to eno, that is effervescence. Okay, the gaseous what you call basically an exothermic reaction where you have a lot of gas being released, right, along with what you call a lot of bubbles and all. That is effervescence. Right, if turbidity persists, meaning even if you heat it, there is turbidity for a long period of time and it is not clearing altogether, then that means that the patient's urine has albumin. Albumin is a protein, blood protein. So that will indicate that the urine has protein. Right, now how you interpret that, how much amount of turbidity is there, based on that interpretation will change. For example, the test will be negative if there is no turbidity, or if there is no cloudiness, the interpretation will be the patient's urine is normal, does not have significant amount of protein. Right, trace amounts will be around 5 mg per deciliter. See, normal is 15 mg, sorry, 10 mg for 100 ml. 1 deciliter is 10 ml. Okay, so here you are having quite a lot, right, almost 10 times more, almost no 20 times more. So 5 mg per 10 ml versus the normal is 10 mg in 100 ml. Okay, so that's a big difference. That will be trace amounts where you'll be able to see a little bit of cloudiness in a black background. So you'll not be able to see the cloudiness clearly, but if you put it against a dark or a black background, then you'll be able to see the cloudiness. That will be trace amounts of protein. Okay, that is still normal, that is not that bad. Trace amounts of protein is not that bad, does not indicate a chronic condition or anything. Now from here on out you will be assigning points, so +1, +2, +3, +4, based on how much amount of turbidity you see. If you see definite cloudiness without flocculation, flocculation is basically um, have you guys ever given or used a suspension in a hospital or something, cough syrup or anything which is in a suspension form, where you have to shake it thoroughly, then administer the drug to the patient? It's generally a syrup like substance, but it is a suspension, it is a different pharmaceutical form. Ever had to do
No,
that?
sir.
कभी shake करके देना पड़ता ना? Never did that. So what happens is some substances or some drugs, when they come as syrup or when they come as suspension particularly, what will happen is the particle inside, the main drug particle inside that suspension, they will tend to what you call clump together, coagulate together, and go down sediment basically. That will happen. So what you need to do is you need to distribute them evenly. I'll show you one image. Hold on. You understand flocculation easier. See, this is flocculation. So what is happening here is, right. See, initially in a normal suspension, the particles are far away. If you let if you let that solution be for a little while, if you keep it on the side, what will happen is they will tend to clump together and they will deposit in the bottom. Okay. If you can see the image, what is happening is free particles which are far away, they will tend to come closer and they will make a small floccule. All right. That floccule will tend to deposit down. Now, generally, if you are able to agitate the solution, meaning that you take the solution and you what you call shake it vigorously, basically you'll be what you call distributing the particles back again evenly and uniformly into the whole solution, right? I hope you understand what is flocculation now, right? If you're not understanding anything, please let me know. So right, so in this, what is the importance of flocculation? In that same test tube, when you see, +1 will be assigned when you will see cloudiness without the dark background. Okay, you do not need to put it against a dark background. In the trace part, you needed to put it against a dark background to actually be able to see it. Here you'll be able to see it without any dark background. This will indicate a significant jump in the concentration of protein. So this will indicate generally around 10 to 30 mg per 10 ml of urine. Okay, that is also pretty high. Okay, you might see a little bit of granularity. So a little bit of granular substances might be seen. All right. Second point, when will you give +2? That is when you see heavy and granular cloudiness without flocculation, meaning you will see literally granules in the urine. Okay, when once you add acetic acid and all, when you once you see the turbidity, you will see small granules present inside that solution. So that will indicate around 40 to 100 mg per deciliter of protein being present in your urine. All right. This basically, as we keep on progressing in points, this basically indicates that more and more amount of protein is present in the urine, and we are going towards a more and more not exactly dangerous condition, or in a condition where more and more protein is being excreted. All right, it might not always be a dangerous condition, it can be, but see, it can be a specific condition where only protein amount is being excreted in excess, but in your other organs there is not such a big problem. It might only be a kidney problem. Sometimes even if you have a lesser value, there might be a systemic infection, or it might be a bigger problem where it is affecting, it is globally affecting, meaning it is affecting your whole body. But here the interpretation is only coming as a little bit of protein damage. See, whenever there is any infection or any disease or something, what will happen is cells will die. When they are dying, proteins are released. That is one indication how proteins, the amount of protein in your urine will increase. Once we went over what causes different proteinuria, right? Light proteinuria, market proteinuria, medium level proteinuria, the different stages, which conditions will cause those. Now they can vary. Some of them, even if they are serious conditions, they might cause lesser amount of proteinuria, and some might not be as serious, but they will cause more proteinuria. All right, you have to see several factors, not just protein. And coming to +3, when will you give +3? That is when you see proper dense opaque cloud. So you'll not be able to see through the tube, the test tube. You'll not be able to see through because the turbidity will make it completely opaque, and there'll be a lot of flocculation, meaning granules will start clumping together. All right, you need to agitate the solution to distribute those proteins evenly. This will indicate generally that the amount of protein in the what you call patient's urine is around 200 to 500 mg per dl. That's a 5-time increase than +2. That's a significant increase. Then +4 is when you see thick cloudiness. This is way over 500 mg per deciliter. So this is definitely a chronic condition where you will see thick cloudiness. So your what you call urine will become very precipitated, and you will see thick cloudiness. The urine, what you call, the solution also will become thick in a way once you add acetic acid. All right, that is how you interpret your protein analysis in urine, basically. All right, so this indicates one of those. Okay, this will generally indicate +2. This test tube. All right, you'll be able to see this much. You'll see slight opacity in that. Now coming to the second test through which you can test for urine, for protein, sorry, in urine. Now, generally, the pH of urine is 4.5 to 8. Most of uh, generally people will have slightly acidic urine, okay, slightly less than 7. That is average, but you generally take a range of 4.5 to 8. In case the urine is alkaline, you need to make it acidic for this particular test. Okay, in case you are getting what you call a urine sample, you perform a small litmus test. I hope you know what is a litmus test, right? Take a litmus paper and what do you call blue to red acid, and what do you call the other way, red to blue, red to blue to red will be acid, and red to blue will be base. So if you do a litmus test, you'll be able to immediately find out what is the pH of that solution. In any case, if you're doing a lab panel, you'll automatically get that pH anyway when you're collecting it and you're giving it in a lab. But in case you're trying to test for proteins through this method, through sulfosalicylic acid method, there are two methods. The first one was heating and adding acetic acid. The second method is this, right? Generally in your exam you can write either one of them, depending on how much the question is asking. Let's suppose it specifically asks, write the methods of testing proteins in urine. Okay, then you'll have to write all the methods that have been mentioned in your textbook. If it is asking in general, write about urine analysis, all the chemical what do you call uh, chemical tests in urine analysis, or all the physical tests in urine analysis, then you can give a general overview wherein you are writing one or the other tests. You don't need to write all the tests in all of the vertical categories, because you'll be testing for several categories. You'll be testing for glucose, you'll be testing for bile, you'll be testing for proteins, several other things. So in that sense, you don't need to write everything. But if it is specifically asking one thing, generally if it is specifically asking, then it will come as a short answer or something, or a very short answer. In that, you'll need to at least mention both of them. Even if you're not if it's a very short answer, then you need to at least mention both of them. If it's a short answer, then you need to write both of them in detail. Okay, how much is present in this PPT, at least that much. What is the test, how is it performed, how do you interpret it? All right. Now coming to sulfosalicylic acid test, as I told you, if the urine is alkaline, you need to acidify it. Okay, you do a litmus test, or you find the pH of the urine and you acidify it. You add a little bit of acid in it. Okay, that is how you acidify it. Now, how do you perform this test is, you take 2 ml of acidic urine, that acidified urine. It is very important that you have acidified urine, else you will not get the, basically you will not get the reaction, and you will not get any proper result. You take 2 ml of acidic urine, and to that you add 20% of sulfosalicylic acid, the same 2 ml. So when you mix both of them, what will happen is, if you allow it to stand for 10 minutes, you will get a little bit of turbidity. Yeah, Dasru, do you have a doubt?
No, sir.
You raised your hand, so so coming back to it, you take 2 ml of acidic urine, you add 2 ml of sulfosalicylic acid, 20% sulfosalicylic acid, and you mix it thoroughly and let it stand for 10 minutes. Okay, after 10 minutes, in case you are seeing turbidity, especially after boiling, now initially if you see turbidity, it is fine, you boil it again. You take that 4 ml after 10 minutes and you boil it again. In case the turbidity persists, we already discussed what is turbidity. Okay, so if turbidity persists, then that is positive for protein, right? In case there is no cloudiness or there is no turbidity, that is absence of protein. This is a little simpler test, right? So here also you will assign a few points. Obviously, if there is no cloudiness, that indicates there is no protein altogether. If there is barely visible cloudiness, there will be what you call trace of proteins. Now again, as you keep on going down further and further, what will happen is you'll see heavier and heavier cloudiness, to the extent that you will start seeing precipitation and flocculation. Right, +1 there will be no flocculation, but cloudiness will be there. +2 you will see heavy and granular cloud being found without any granular flocculation. So without any flocculation, the cloud will become thicker. Third one, you will see flocculation with a dense cloud. Fourth one, you will see proper precipitation along with cloudiness, right? I hope you know what is precipitation. Right, the particles will start sedimenting down. Right, they'll come together, form a solid substance, and they'll start sedimenting down. That is precipitation. Right. I hope Yata clear hai what we did till now. If you have any doubts, let me know. We'll clear that, then we'll proceed. If you're not having any doubts, then we'll go ahead.
No, sir.
Okay, is it clear for everyone? If you want me to repeat anything, please feel free to tell me or put it in the chat box. Either way, I don't mind repeating it again or telling it in a different way or any particular part that you want. No? Okay. See, here I can't help you. You have to help yourself. So be shameless. Like खुला कोई भी नहीं देख रहा तो be shameless. Nicely be shameless and ask doubts. There is no shame in asking doubts at all. All right. Uh, Coming to sugars in urine, how you test for sugars, specifically glucose. Through this test, you will not be able to test what you call sucrose. That is the only exception. Okay, if you remember, once I had given you the introduction to carbohydrates. We'll anyway start when we start carbohydrates. We'll go over that intro again. But if you remember, there were several sugars, right? Uh, 3 carbon sugar, 4 carbon sugar, 5 carbon sugar. You had erythrose, you had ribose, you had fructose, glucose, several of them, right? Now this particular test, you can test several types of sugar, but you will not be able to test for sucrose specifically. All right, this particularly tests only reducing sugars. So if you have a sugar that will donate hydrogen, that is a reducing sugar basically. Sorry, donate OH, not hydrogen. If it is donating OH, then that will be a reducing sugar, or it is accepting hydrogen, either way, right? So you can also put that as donating electron, okay, if you want to put it that way. Now coming to sugars in urine, how do you test for that? This is a non-specific test, so it will not specify which type of sugar is there. It will only tell you that sugar is there. All right. Even though we are not, we know that it cannot test for sucrose. There are several other types of sugars in your body. With this test, you will not be able to know whether any one particular type of sugar is present, but what you can know is that sugar is present, high amount of sugar is present, that you can know in this test. All right. The test is Benedict's qualitative test. So what you do is you take Benedict's reagent. You get a very particular reagent, sodium citrate, sodium nitrate, and you get cuprous sulfate. So the principle of the test is, that is the Benedict's reagent. Okay, the sodium nitrate, sodium citrate, and cuprous sulfate. What you do is the aldehyde group in that reducing sugar. Now you know, if you remember carbohydrates and all, on top of a glucose molecule, I'll draw a glucose molecule. 1 second. If you remember, your glucose molecule looked something like this: 3, 4, CHO, CH2O. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. So you had OH, 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 H, H, OH, H, H. This was your D-glucose, right? If you remember, I told you D-glucose is the one that will turn light towards right, right? So here the aldehyde group will be this, that CHO group on the top, that will be the aldehyde group. This is significant in our test, okay? So what is happening here is that aldehyde group, particularly of the reducing sugar. Here I took glucose as an example. It can be any other reducing sugar, okay? It can be a 3-carbon sugar, it can be a 4-carbon sugar, any sugar. So the aldehyde group of that reducing sugar reduces, or it will basically donate an electron to cupric ions in the Benedict's reagent. Okay, this will cause a change in color. You'll eventually see what is happening. But basically the principle of the test is the aldehyde group of your reducing sugar. If there is reducing sugar in your urine, what will happen is, as you add Benedict's reagent, that fellow will get reduced. That is the principle basically, right? Now it will change color, and how, depending on the amount of sugar present in your urine, you will get different amount of what you call colors, different grades of colors, or different colors altogether, because the final color of the solution depends on how much amount of this precipitate was formed, and therefore the color gives an indication of how much reducing sugar was present. So this is a direct correlation test, where if you have higher amount of sugar, you will get a very specific color. If you have lower amount of sugar, you will get less different color. So if you can see this bar, if you have less amount of sugar in your urine, you will get green color. Once you add Benedict's reagent in your urine, what will happen is you will get green color. If as it keeps on progressing, if the amount of sugar is more and more, the color will change to yellow, orange, or red. So instead of, see how it will be is, you up dekho, I'll show you the procedure of the test. See, if you take 5 ml of Benedict's reagent, boil it for 3 to 5 minutes and add a few drops of urine. Okay, that is around 0.5 ml, 8 drops of urine. You add into that and you boil it again. And what will happen is once you cool it down, you will that solution will change color. And depending on the amount of sugar present, it will immediately go to a certain color. It will not be like green, say yellow, say orange, say red hota. All right. Immediately, if you have a very high amount of sugar in your urine, it will directly go to red. All right. The color of the solution will immediately go to red. Initially, if it is cuprous sulfate, it will be bluish in color, but anyway, it will directly become red. Okay, I hope you understand the reaction. Basically, you take 5 ml of Benedict's reagent, you boil it for 5 minutes, then you add 8 drops of urine. Okay, whatever urine you have, you are trying to test that urine for glucose if it is present or not. Okay, you mix that urine, shake it a little bit, and boil it again. After you let the solution cool down, it will immediately change color. That will give you the interpretation. This is Benedict's reagent. You have sodium carbonate, sodium citrate, and copper sulfate. Right? Now, this is the procedure. Yeah, recording results. So this is the interpretation basically. Color varies from blue. So as I told you, cuprous sulfate is bluish in color. That is why the Benedict solution itself will be bluish in color. Right? Sodium compounds, the carbonate and citrate will not have a color as such. Copper sulfate will give it color. Right? Uh, Now, depending on the color, you will get different interpretation. If you get no color change at all, if it remains bluish, that indicates negative, meaning there is no glucose in your urine altogether. Patient's result is completely normal. All right. Trace amount will be slightly greenish. Again, as you keep on going plus plus plus, you will get specific colors. If it is +1, it will be blue. If you get +2, it is greenish yellow. Right? Blue to yellow ke beech mein green aata. If you mix blue and yellow, you will get green. For those of you who have played with colors at some point of time, played with colors in the sense actually painted or something like that, you know color combinations. That if you add a little bit of blue and a yellow, you'll get green. So RGB ke basic changes, right? If you know what I'm talking about, you'll know. If you don't know, then you will not know. Okay, it is basically taking colors and playing with them. So if you get +2, you'll get something in between blue and yellow, wherein you are getting greenish yellow. If you get something in between, what you call greenish yellow, the next one will be basically yellow. Here the interpretation will be the percentage of sugar will keep on increasing basically. In that same urine, what will happen is the what you call amount of sugar that is present, that will increase with change in color, in the sense that brick red precipitate, that will indicate the highest amount of sugar that is present in the urine, basically indicates the patient generally has a condition like diabetes. Okay, brick red or orange red, again it can start all the way from yellow. Even if the patient is having diabetes, they might have it in control. So do we have practical? No, you don't have practicals to the best of my knowledge. No, sadly. If you did have it, it'll be much more fun. You can actually see it, but you don't have practicals. That is a problem. In this at least, biochemistry के practical नहीं है तुम लोगों को. रहता तो अच्छा रहता था. It will be easier to understand this through practical. All of these tests. So in any case, as you keep progressing, depending on the amount of sugar present in the urine, now you can have a diabetic patient who is continuously taking insulin, or they are regularly taking medication. In them, the reaction might come greenish yellow, because they are greenish yellow or blue as well, because they are keeping their blood glucose in check. Okay, and there might even be people who do not have diabetes mellitus, but they have simply eaten a lot of sugar in one particular day. Let's suppose Diwali or something like that. You know, in Diwali people eat a lot of sweets. So during that period of time, if you check the urine of some patient, it might go all the way up to yellow or orange precipitate, simply because in that day they had more amount of sugar, which related to more amount of sugar in your urine. All right, there's a limit to how much sugar your body can absorb. After that, it will start excreting. Right, so this is how you do the procedure. You get different colors based on different amount of what you call glucose present in it. If you can see, brick red will give you an extremely high what you call concentration. It will indicate an extremely high concentration of glucose present in urine. See, more than 2 grams per deciliter. That's quite a lot. Right? Negative will be blue. As you keep on going from left to right, you get increasing concentrations of your glucose in urine. Right? I hope you understand this test. कोई डाउट्स है कैसा हुआ ये, या क्या बोलते हैं Benedict's reagent and Benedict's test कैसा perform करे, or anything in particular about Benedict's test? If you have no doubts, then I'll proceed further.
No doubt, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, cool. So, what are the sugars that can be detected through Benedict's test? These are the common sugars that you will see: glucose, galactose, lactose, fructose, maltose, and pentose. These six are the main ones that you will see. False positive is basically it will give you a color, but that does not indicate. See, false positive and false negative. तुम लोगों को एक बार बोला था शायद ना? What's false positive? False positive
Yes,
is
sir.
basically what you call a positive result, but it is not because of what you're looking for. ठीक है, यहाँ पर reaction मिल रहा ना. Let's suppose you get a green color or yellow color. Generally you will think that it is because of glucose, but here it is because of a different thing. So if it can be because of ascorbic acid, vitamin C, or it can be due to creatine, uric acid, salicylates. Salicylates are drugs. Okay, your aspirin is a salicylate. If someone is taking aspirin, then generally you have to wait for a while before आप समझो कोई पेशेंट को aspirin दिए previous day or previous night or sometime, you have to wait for a day or two so that complete amount of aspirin is excreted out of your system before you can perform this test, or else it will give you a false positive. Meaning if that salicylate is present, you might get a yellow color, but this does not indicate that the patient has high glucose or high sugar level. Okay, this will give a false positive test. The same for X-ray contrast. If someone is you know what is an X-ray contrast? A small amount of chemical is injected. Sometimes nowadays it is not done, but that is injected and then you perform the X-ray for a better picture, especially in blood vessels and all. So that is X-ray contrast. That can again alter. Nowadays it is not that common. Okay, but in olden days they used to do that. So right, this will be test for glucose. This is another test for glucose. This is a sequential enzyme test. Okay, this इसमें भी आप glucose ही test कर रहे हैं, but how you do that is a little different. Okay, what you do in this is a particular enzyme, glucose oxidase. This fellow will oxidize or catalyze the formation of gluconic acid. So glucose को if I subject it to glucose oxidase, it will turn into gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. ठीक है, if hold on, I'll draw that. किधर है? So if I have the same glucose and I, yeah, Akansha, you have it out. Raise your hand. So I'll just abbreviate it as GO, gluconic oxidase. Okay, so I will get hydrogen peroxide and another compound of glucose. Okay, for now I'll abbreviate it like this. So this is the basic reaction what is occurring. There's another way of testing glucose. If the patient's urine has this, when I'm subjecting it to this particular enzyme, I will get this and this. Okay, that is the way of interpreting it. Hold on. So as you can see, if I take glucose and I oxidize it with glucose oxidase, I will get gluconic acid and I will get hydrogen peroxide. On the other hand, if I use a different enzyme, see यहाँ पर दिख रहा आपको. If you take a second enzyme and you use what you call hydrogen peroxide. So if you what will happen is basically a second enzyme peroxides catalyzes, the enzyme is peroxide that will catalyze a reaction where hydrogen peroxide and potassium iodide chromogen that is used to change the color of glucose. So basically what will happen is, see, this is the reaction. Now you're taking glucose and you're subjecting it in air to, so you're taking a test tube with glucose, and obviously that O2 air is basically in the presence of a what do you call oxygenated chamber. You do it in air. Okay, some reactions you do it in without the presence of oxygen. Some reactions you have to do in the presence of oxygen. This is one such. You take glucose in urine and you add a little bit of glucose oxidase. It will change the what do you call, it will change glucose into gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. Subsequently, what you do is you subject hydrogen peroxide to chromogen. That is a dye. Okay, it's an oxidizable dye. Once you what do you call subject it to this dye, you will get color change. Okay, because that dye will get oxidized because of H2O2. That color change is what you are looking for. All right. From glucose, you initially form gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide, when you subject it to a particular dye, the dye will change color. That is how you know that the urine has what you call glucose. All right. This is a slightly indirect way, but this way also you can find out how you can. This way also you can find out whether glucose is present or not in urine. All right. I'll repeat once again. You're taking glucose in a small test tube and you're adding a little bit of glucose oxidase. It is an enzyme. All right. Immediately you will get gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. to that hydrogen peroxide or to that same solution, I will add a little bit of chromogen. Chromogen is a dye. Okay. As soon as I add the dye, what will happen is, if substantial amount of hydrogen peroxide is there, I will immediately get a change in color. All right. In case initially this glucose itself was very little or it was not present, I will not get this color change. If there is significant amount of glucose, then I will be able to get this color change. Okay. So that is the interpretation. If I'm getting change in color, that will indicate that the patient urine has glucose level. Now, based on the intensity of color, you can gauge how much amount of glucose is present. Okay, you do not have interpretation for this, but basically the brightness of that color and any particular rather than any particular color, the intensity of the color will indicate how much glucose is present. So red, dull red, bright red, things like that. Yeah. We have 8 minutes. Okay, we can finish ketones at least. So ketones and urine. What is a ketone? This is a ketone. See, C double bond O. ये जो structure है. If you remember carbohydrates में, I told you your sugars can have both an aldehyde group and a what you call ketone group. A ketone group will be one with C double bond O. Okay, with R and R. So basically your CH3 is one what you call one alkyl group, and your CH2 COOH is another alkyl group. For now, that is R and R dash. So different alkyl groups are attached to that C double bond O. This will indicate a ketone. All right. How do you test for ketones? Or first of all, what types of ketones do you find in urine? Okay. You will generally get acetone, that is acetoacetic acid. That is this methyl acetoacetone. That and diacetic acid, right? That is this. Or you will be able to find this. So these are interchangeable. If you add or subtract a little bit of carbon dioxide or a few protons here and there, you'll be able to get the other product. So this is interchangeable in your urine, in the sense that the ketones in your urine will either be in the form of acetoacetic acid, or they'll be in the form of acetone, or they'll be in the form of hydroxybutyric acid. And they can be interchangeable, they can change in between. So beta hydroxybutyric acid will change into acetoacetic acid, that will change into acetone, based on how long you're keeping the urine, whether depending on the pH of the urine, whatever is suitable, whichever form that ketone can stabilize or stay stable in your urine, that form it will stay in. Okay, if one particular pH is there in which acetone can be stable, all of the ketones in your urine will convert into acetone. Or if you have a particular condition where acetoacetic acid can be persisted or it can be stored, that is when your urine will convert all the ketones in your urine to this form, or basically all the ketones in your urine will be converted into acetoacetic acid. That is why it is an interchangeable reaction. All right, these three are the main ones that you will see in urine. Now, what causes ketones in urine? The primary cause is diabetic ketoacidosis. So diabetic ketoacidosis is a complication of diabetes, wherein what is happening, because glucose is not present. Now glucose is present, but it is not used by your body. Okay, to put it simply, glucose diabetes में क्या होता? Let's suppose this is a cell. Okay, any random cell in your body. You know this cell needs glucose for energy. Okay, very important. Glucose is a very important source of energy for all cells, all types of cells. This energy it is getting from blood. Okay, let's suppose this is blood, it is flowing this way and it is carrying molecules of glucose. This fellow is coming here. Now generally what happens is, when this glucose comes near a cell, you will have one fellow called insulin. All right, I'll do it in a different color. Hold on. Let's do insulin in purple. Okay, insulin will come into picture, and what this will do is, your cells generally have a particular receptor. Okay, let me put that receptor like this. Imagine that receptor as a small gate. Okay, imagine the door of your class the same way. Until and unless insulin comes and knocks on the door, another gate will not open where glucose can go inside. Okay, that is the basic pretext. What is happening in diabetes is, there is a problem here or there is a problem here. Either way, glucose is not able to go inside. Okay, I'll repeat once again. Here what is happening, right? Glucose is present in your blood, right? Normally for glucose to go inside your cell, okay, to be absorbed by your cell for normal metabolic processes, you need a hormone called insulin. You know this, right? Until and unless insulin is present, glucose cannot get absorbed inside your cell. What insulin basically does is, let's suppose this is the gate of insulin. Insulin will come and attach to this gate. This attachment will cause another gate to open through which glucose can get inside the cell. All right, this is what normally happens in healthy individuals. In diabetes, what will happen is, there is a problem either in this gate, or there is a problem in this gate, or there is lack of insulin. Okay? Either one of these, okay, any one of those three, there can be a problem based on which diabetes will be categorized, different types of diabetes and different subtypes of diabetes. So basically in all of the diabetes, what will happen is, this fellow remains in your blood. That is why blood glucose level will increase, because what will happen, glucose is not able to go inside your cells, hence it will remain in your blood. Here gluconeogenesis has not stopped, but what you call, whatever glucose is being generated, that is not able to get inside cell, meaning hyperglycemia occurs. Basically glucose level in your blood will increase. Now when glucose level in blood increases, this basically means that your cell is not getting any glucose, right? If cell is not getting any glucose, it will try to find other sources of energy. That other source of energy will be any other cell. So it will start breaking down muscle, it will start breaking down different cells. During this process, what will happen is, ketones will be, fatty acids are formed, and from fatty acids you will get ketones. So it will start breaking down adipose tissue. If there is adipose tissue, that will be broken down. It will break down muscles at one point. All of this will cause production of fatty acid, will in turn will cause production of ketones. So what will happen is, at one point a diabetic patient will have a lot of ketones in their blood, to an extent that, if you remember, we told, agar ketones high hai, so you will get fruity urine, right? If you remember in physical exam, I told you, if ketones are very high, then you will get fruity urine. If ketones are high, you will also get fruity breath. So the patient will also breathe the, what you call, breath that they will exhale, that will be fruity in smell. That indicates diabetic ketoacidosis, that is DKA. So another way is through fever. In case someone has fever, that can cause ketonuria, or anorexia if someone is not eating properly, or someone has eating disorders, or any gastrointestinal disturbances, where again, in all of these, what will happen is, one way or the other, fatty acids are getting oxidized and they will form into ketones, right? Either it is fasting or starvation, or if someone is having severe vomiting, all of these will lead to ketonuria, right? So what you call, amount of ketones in urine will increase. How do you test for this is Rothera's test. We'll get into this tomorrow because we have around 1 minute left. Okay, we'll continue from here. I hope you guys understood today's class. If you have any doubts, let me know right now. I'll clear that if I can. Right. How the ketone synthesizes the body. Okay, so basically what will happen is, if we're talking about diabetes, let's suppose, okay, because ketones are normally not produced in your body, at least not in excess. Okay, in this particular condition, what will happen is, uh, because your cells are getting destroyed because of whatever reason they might be, okay, not just diabetes, because of whatever reason, let's suppose cells are being destroyed and the fatty acid present inside the cell, that is getting out. Okay, it can be as adipose tissue, where adipose tissue is being utilized and fatty acids are being uh, thrown into blood, or through some other cell being disintegrated and fatty acids coming. In any case, fatty acids are coming in your cell. These fatty acids will be converted into ketones through a long process. Okay, I will not get into the process, but these fatty acids will be converted into ketones through a cascade reaction. You will have several reactions through which finally you will get a ketone. This will increase the amount of ketones in your blood. That is how you get ketones in your body basically. But I hope that answers your doubt. Anyone else? Any doubts?
No, sir.
If you want me to, I'll show you the whole reaction, how fatty acids will be converted into ketones. But again,